Welcome to Question of the Week. This is a Facebook Live session where I take on your science faith questions. Each Monday, ideally at 9:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, 12:30 in the afternoon for those of you on the East Coast. This week's broadcast is originating at a special time because earlier this morning I was in the studio here at the Reasons to Believe offices recording interviews with our latest visiting scholar, Dr. Erica Carlson, a physicist from Purdue University. So because of those scheduling demands, I was unable to originate the broadcast at the usual time, at the regularly scheduled time, but I wanted to make sure that I did a broadcast today on this week's question of the week because of the high level of interest in the topic. So this week's question actually comes to us from a number of people. Some of them include my friend Guy Coe, Brian Bach, Jeff Fifo, who is the pastor of Revolution is the pastor of Revolution Church in Salinas, Kansas, and has a show called Truth Revolution along with Dave Wagner. Great show for those of you interested in Christian apologetics. Stephen Joyner, Eric Johnson, and then on Twitter, Daniel Mikalski, Paul Ellison, and Paul Morris, to name just a few people, asked me what did I think about the announcement that happened last week regarding the discovery of Homo sapien remains that date at 300,000 years in age. What does this discovery mean for evolutionary models? What does this discovery mean for old Earth creationist models like the one we espouse here at Reasons to Believe? I'm going to take on those questions in just a minute, but I want to remind you that if you are watching this broadcast, please take a moment, check in the comment section. Let us know who you are and where you're watching from. This is very helpful information for us to know who's watching, when they're watching, where they're watching from. But by also entering your name in the comment section, you help to elevate the profile of this Facebook Live broadcast in other people's Facebook feeds. Last week, a number of people checked in, and this includes people like Rick Baduka, my friend who I've gotten to know, meeting him at Reasons to Believe AMP conferences in Southern California. He's from Palmdale, California. Robert Knox and Brad Whitmire from Northern California checked in. Ed Flanagan from Baxter, Kentucky checked in. Joe Cunningham from Hanover, Maryland. Wes Smith from Queensland, Australia, and then finally Brian Horton from Savannah, Georgia. And I mentioned Brian because I knew Brian when he was a wee lad, when he was a young man, probably in junior high, maybe high school. His mother and my wife were good friends when we lived in Cincinnati, Ohio. Both families homeschooled. And so we got to know Brian and his brother and sister quite well, and his mom and dad. So it was nice to see Brian's name. He's now a husband and a father, and so it's just gratifying to see Brian checking in and saying hi. Okay, also, if you're watching this broadcast, please go ahead and interact with it. Use the like button. Again, by liking the broadcast, you help to elevate the profile of the broadcast so that it appears in more people's Facebook feed. Also, if you have any suggestions on how we can make this broadcast better, please put them in the comment section. And finally, if you want to offer your perspective on this discovery, I'd love to hear from you. Enter your comments in the Facebook comments. Also, if you disagree with me, please feel free to air out your differing perspectives. I want to create an environment on my Facebook page, both my public figure and my personal page, where people can discuss very important science faith issues without restriction, without censorship. Okay, without any further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at this particular question. This question is prompted by a number of popular news items that showed up last week all over the place on the web. and it had to do with work reported by a team of paleontologists headed up by researchers from the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig, Germany. And these researchers basically excavated a site in Morocco known as the Jebel Irhoud site. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that correctly. And they discovered a number of fossil specimens, also some archaeological remains that dated at 300,000 years ago, and claim on this basis that Homo sapiens originated about 100,000 years earlier than people thought, and that the origin was not in East Africa, but was actually continental, that there was a continental distribution of Homo sapiens, and that the origin of humanity was in a diffuse location throughout Africa. And so this prompted questions on the part of a number of people. What do I think about this discovery as an old Earth creationist? And also, what impact does this have on evolutionary models and on the reasons to believe old Earth creationist model? So very important discovery, very important questions. Now, just a little bit of background information so people can have a better context for why there was so much excitement generated by this particular discovery. The Jebel Irhoud site is located outside of Marrakesh in Morocco and was discovered in 1960 as part of a mining excavation where people were looking for a particular mineral called barite. And when they were digging, they uncovered basically a skull that was embedded in the wall of the excavation setting. Interestingly enough, an engineer from the site dug out the skull and took it home and kept it for a while as a souvenir. It later wound up in the hands of the University of Rabat in Morocco, and that then triggered a joint expedition of both French and Moroccan scientists who went back to that cave or to the mining site and excavated additional hominin remains. At that time, they estimated the date of those layers at about 40,000 years ago and interpreted this creature as being like an African Neanderthal. They also discovered some tools that indicated that the tool culture was Mousterian, which is characteristic of what you see for Neanderthals. In 1968, another team went back to that site and uncovered a child's jaw and estimated the date of the jaw at about 160,000 years. Because of what appeared to be the relatively recent date of these specimens, and because of their enigmatic nature, many people just regarded them as an evolutionary side branch, relatively unimportant to the evolutionary scheme when it comes to the origin of humanity. But this, the existence of this site prompted scientists from the Max Planck Institute to go back to this site and to do some fresh excavations. I'm not completely sure I know why they went back to this site, what made them think that there could be more remains at the site. But these kind of excavations are important because in that time regime that we're talking about here, between 150,000 years ago and roughly 300,000 years ago, there's a dearth of hominin fossils. There's just a limited number of fossil specimens that people have to work with. And so this is considered to be a time regime in human evolution where we really don't have much understanding as to what's going on. We do have remains of creatures like the Homo kabish man in Ethiopia that dates at about 190,000 years in age, some specimens from Israel that date in the 160 to 190,000 year regime. We have Homo sapiens idaltu, the hair-toe man, that dates at about 160,000 years ago, and Homo rhodesiensis, the Rhodesian man that dates, again, in that rough time window. Most people think traditionally that Homo rhodesiensis was the ancestor that gave rise to modern humans. This particular group of hominins are referred to as the archaic Homo sapiens. Sometimes they're called Homo sapiens, sometimes they're called ancient humans, early humans, early Homo sapiens, near anatomically modern humans. These are different monikers that are given to these particular fossil finds. All of them, basically, except for the finds in Israel, indicated, again, an East African origin of humanity in the neighborhood of 200 to 150,000 years ago. But again, we have a very limited fossil record to work from. So these researchers decided again to go back and to excavate the Jebel Irhoud site. And what they discovered at this site was a skull, jawbone, teeth, some leg bones that corresponded to 3 adult individuals, a juvenile, and a child that they estimate of an age of 7 years old. They also discovered stone tools. The anatomy of these hominin specimens, as well as the nature of the tools, is consistent with earlier finds from this particular site. And they were able to do a fairly detailed characterization of the Jebel Irhoud specimens, indicating that it looks as if they had a face very similar to modern humans. But the jawbone was much larger, the teeth were much larger, the brow ridge was different, and more importantly, the skull shape was different. Instead of being globular and having a high skull, it was a low skull that was elongated. These characteristic features suggest that these, again, are not anatomically modern humans, but rather are, again, archaic Homo sapiens or near anatomically modern humans in the same category as Homo sapiens, Idaltu, the hair-to man, Homo kabish, and Rhodesian man. Now, early attempts to date these fossils were not successful. Many people produced dates that were well under 150,000 years in age. These researchers went to the site and did a detailed characterization of the geological layers, noting that a particular layer, labeled layer 7, is where the hominin fossils for the fresh excavation located at the lower level of layer 7. This is also where the tools were found. The assumption is that the other tools and the other hominin remains likely came from this layer as well, but there's no data on the provenance of these earlier fossil finds. Now, one of the things that's interesting is that in this site as well are the remains of creatures like gazelles, zebra, and some of the remains show markings on them that indicate that the tools were likely used for butchery of these animals. Interestingly enough, there's also charcoal remains at this site, as well as evidence that some of the tools had been burnt. And because some of the tools had been burnt, this means that the tools themselves are prime candidates for a type of dating known as luminescence dating. And the idea here is that over time, because of radioactivity in the environment, electrons are ejected out of the ground state orbitals but become trapped in a solid state matrix. And if that sample is hit with a pulse of heat or a pulse of light, it'll stimulate those electrons to fall back to the ground state, and when they do so, they release energy in the form of light. The amount of light released corresponds to the number of electrons trapped in the excited state, and those numbers that are trapped in the excited state is a function of time generated over time as radioactivity, again, excites those electrons. So the principle behind luminescence dating is sound, but it's a very difficult method to pull off because you have to calibrate the luminescence clock, and each clock is specific for the environment that it's found in. And what the researchers did is characterize what they call the gamma dosing of the environment, and from that they could estimate the likelihood or the number of electrons that would be promoted to the excited state. It's tricky though because the exact composition of the environment is critical in terms of the efficiency of electron trapping. So there's a number of other factors that influence, again, the calibration, but having a good understanding of the gamma dosing is rather critical. And based on that, they made thermoluminescence measurements of the stone tools. They made 14 separate measurements, getting a date that averaged at about 320,000 years ago. In earlier studies, people tried to date the 1968 find of the child's jaw by looking at one of the teeth using electron spin resonance measurements. This again is a similar technique where you're looking at, with electron spin resonance, the number of electrons trapped in a single electron state in the matrix as a result of radioactivity in the environment. And again, you have to know the gamma dosing for the environment, and again, trapping efficiencies and things like that. What the researchers were able to do is apply their gamma dosing data to earlier electron spin resonance measurements and estimated the age of the tooth at about 280,000 years ago. So on this basis, they would argue that it looks indeed as if these particular specimens at Jebel Irhoud date at, again, about 300,000 years ago. So a very nice piece of science from both the anthropology end as well as from the dating end. Now, what do they do with this data? Well, they argue that it looks as if the evolution of modern humans, of Homo sapiens sapiens, didn't necessarily happen in East Africa, but very well could have included the entire continent of Africa, where there was this continentally diffuse population of archaic Homo sapiens that over time gave rise to modern humans. And to extend their argument, they point out that there is a find in South Africa. This is called the Florisbad specimen that dates at 260,000 years ago, that is also interpreted as an archaic Homo sapien that, again, helps to fill out this picture of a continentally diffuse population of Homo sapiens. And so they argue that, again, this overturns kind of a traditional model for human evolution, but suggests that, again, Homo sapiens emerged as a much larger population than anybody would have thought, and that they view the features of this particular set of specimens as well as Homo sapiens ideltu and Homo kabish and the Homo rhodesiensis as being transitional between a more primitive form of Homo sapien and the modern form of Homo sapien. Now, the question is, what impact does this have on the reasons to believe model for human origins? This model is based on the biblical account of human origins, where we would argue that human beings were created through God's direct personal intervention, that there was an Adam and an Eve that were the first human beings that gave rise to all humanity, and that human beings are uniquely made in God's image. And in support of this model, we would point to work in genetics that indicates humanity originates about 130 to 140,000 years ago, and that as part of humanity's origin, there is the concept of mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosomal Adam. And that mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosomal Adam, we would argue, point to the reality of a biblical Adam and a biblical Eve. Of course, there's a dispute that we would have with population geneticists who would argue that the genetic diversity of humanity is too great to be encompassed, or is too great to come from a primordial pair. There must have been several thousand individuals that gave rise to humanity. But we would, again, dispute that, because we would argue that the methods used to estimate population sizes from the genetic data are suspect. They're just simply not reliable methods. On top of that, we have very good evidence from the archaeological record that the modern behavior displayed by modern humans shows up very close to the time when the genetic evidence says that humanity originates, and the fossil record seems to indicate that modern humans would have appeared after the appearance of creatures like Homo kabesh and Homo sapiens ideltu. So the fossil record indirectly, as well as the archaeological record and the genetic record directly, indicate an origin of humanity in about, again, 150,000 year regime, which we would argue is fully compatible with the biblical creation account of humanity's origin. We would argue that the hominids were creatures that were created by God that existed for a period of time when extinct, that they had intelligence and emotional capability, but we would reject the idea that these were transitional intermediates leading up to modern humans. Now, we would argue that these creatures, because they had intelligence, they had emotional capability, had some capacity for tool manufacture, for quote-unquote culture, but that they lacked a key quality, namely the image of God, and because of that, their behavior would clearly be unsophisticated compared to the behavior of modern humans. We would see these creatures in the same vein as we would see chimpanzees, orangutans, and gorillas. Of course, these creatures are distinct from the great apes, but we would see them in terms of their behavioral capacity in a broad sense, and their biological similarity to humans in the same way that we would see the great apes. And so, what effect then does this discovery at Jebel Irhoud have on the RTB model? Well, we would look at creatures like Homo sapiens idaltu, Homo kabish, the finds in the cave sites in Israel, Rhodesian man, as examples, as being essentially not modern humans, but basically creatures that were distinct from modern humans, that their anatomical features were distinct from modern humans. Their behavior is clearly much more aligned with that of Neanderthals than with modern humans based on the archaeological record associated with these finds, and we would lump simply Jebel Irhoud finds in that category. Again, they're anatomically different from modern humans in a number of distinct ways. They are as different from modern humans, I would argue, as Neanderthals are different from modern humans, and other creatures like Homo heidelbergensis. And we would say, again, their behavior, given the archaeological sites, indicates non-symbolic capacities, which, again, align them with creatures like Neanderthals, not with modern humans. Now, of course, there's other questions that arise, like why would God create these creatures that look so much like modern humans? And we kind of discussed that question on last week's Facebook Live episode, so please check that out if you're interested. But at the end of the day, I don't really see this particular discovery as being problematic in any way, shape, or form for the RTB model, any more so than Homo sapiens idaltu or the Rhodesian man or Homo kabish would be problematic for the RTB model. I would just see these creatures as, again, creatures that God created that existed for a period of time and then later disappeared from the scene. Part of the confusion, I believe, has to do with the way in which anthropologists refer to these hominids compared to how we would talk about human beings in day-to-day conversation. For anthropologists, any creature that walks erect that is a primate is labeled a human. This would include the Australopithecines, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Neanderthals, and of course these archaic Homo sapiens. They would use the term Homo sapien not to refer to you and me, but to refer to these creatures that appear in the archaeological record prior to the appearance of modern humans. They're called Homo sapiens. We are referred to as Homo sapiens sapiens. Sometimes you'll see Neanderthals referred to as Homo sapiens neanderthalensis. Other times they're considered to be a distinct species, Homo neanderthalensis. But even like the nomenclature for Homo sapiens idaltu is reflecting the fact that this is an archaic Homo sapien. It is not an anatomically or behaviorally modern human. If they're going to refer anthropologists to us, the term would be Homo sapiens sapiens or modern humans. That would be another designation for us. And then sometimes you'll see distinctions made between anatomically and behaviorally modern humans. I'm of the opinion that anatomically modern humans are behaviorally modern humans based on the evidence at hand, but sometimes anthropologists will actually distinguish those two, arguing that our behavior appeared after our physical form appeared in an evolutionary context. So again, I don't really see this particular find as being problematic to the RTB human origins model in any way, shape, or form. It's really much ado about nothing in that sense, although I will point out that this is a very nice piece of science. The work is remarkable that was carried out at this particular site. And it's a very important find because we have a dearth of fossil remains. We don't understand much about hominin natural history in this time regime. And so, from my perspective, it is a very important finding. Now, from an evolutionary standpoint, the question is this one of those finds that shake the evolutionary tree, that rewrite human evolution? Well, the scientists from the Max Planck Institute argue that that is indeed the case. And if that is so, then this is another example where, again, a single fossil find actually creates chaos as opposed to bringing clarity to the evolutionary paradigm. It's my contention that if a scientific theory is sound, that the more work that we do to characterize that theory, the more data we generate to evaluate the theory, the more observations we make, the more that things should come together. Maybe some discoveries are unexpected, but those unexpected discoveries will actually help things to crystallize, that the theory gains greater explanatory power, that things make more sense. But what we see when it comes to the hominid fossil record is, you could argue from a very general sense that the existence of the hominids could be interpreted as evidence for human evolution. But when you push in on the data, when you begin to probe the data in detail, what you discover is time and time again, new discoveries throw the discipline into chaos. This is the fourth time where that claim is being made in the last 2 months. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about the claim that maybe hominins originate in Europe, not in Africa, and how this represents a failed prediction of the evolutionary paradigm, based again on a single fossil find. We talked about the fact that with Homo naledi, that the discovery of this hominin basically displaced Homo habilis and Australopithecus afarensis as the transitional intermediates linking Australopithecines to the Homo genus, and even displaced Australopithecus sediba, which was that creature that actually displaced Homo habilis and Australopithecus afarensis from the transitional status when it was discovered. Well, Homo naledi also puts Australopithecus sediba on short order in that sense. And yet, when we date Homo naledi, we discover that its date doesn't match where we think it should be based on the anatomical features of Homo naledi. Instead of being 2 to 3 million years old, it's 200 to 300,000 years old. Again, rewriting human evolution. There was a discovery just a few weeks ago, even, of Neanderthals making their way into North America. 130,000 years before modern humans made their way into North America. And here we have, again, this particular find that says Homo sapiens did not originate in East Africa, but again was continentally diffuse population. So again, another instance where chaos ensues as opposed to clarity as a result of new data in anthropology. To me, this is one marker that the evolutionary model is not in a healthy state, not in a healthy condition. Now, there are some anthropologists who are arguing that this find actually has very little significance in the grand scheme of things. Lee Berger, interestingly enough, a scientist who's renowned for making grand claims about the importance of his particular fossil finds, argues that these researchers have overstepped their bounds, that they have just a couple of fossils, and instead of drawing a line between the two fossils, they're drawing a continent between the two fossil finds. There are people like John Shea who question the dating. And of course, this is not an unreasonable thing to do, because luminescence dating is highly problematic. And while the amount of effort that went into this particular study was incredible to ensure that luminescence dating was done as best as it could be done, you still have to be concerned about luminescence dating because it's so difficult to calibrate the luminescence response. And then John Shea also brings up the fact that you're not even certain if these artifacts actually are properly associated with the hominin remains because of mixing of layers. And so he is questioning, maybe not in a strong way, but urging caution about the dates for these specimens. And then Christopher Stringer argues that the delicate facial features that are characteristic of modern humans actually originates well before the Jebel Irhoud specimens were on Earth. And so he argues that these specimens are again belong to the archaic Homo sapiens, but he questions how much they really are telling us in a real sense about human evolution. So even among evolutionary biologists, they're not certain what to make of these particular finds. So at the end of the day, I think these are interesting discoveries, to be certain. They have little bearing on the RTB human origins model. Or another way to say it is our model is robust enough to accommodate the discovery of the Jebel Irhoud specimens. And if anything, it again illustrates just another instance of where new fossil finds create all kinds of consternation for human evolutionary models. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and bring things to a close. I just want to thank you for watching this broadcast. Please again, take the moment to check in the comment section. Let us know who you are and where you're from. Please go ahead and like this broadcast. It's a huge help to us. When you do that, it helps us again to increase the exposure of this broadcast, giving it greater elevation in people's Facebook feeds. And then finally, if you want to offer your perspective on this, don't hesitate to do so in the comment section. Also, if you want to ask a question for consideration in future broadcasts, you can do it in the comment section, send me a private message, or post to my Facebook page. I read every question that people pose to me, and I really wish I had the time to respond to everybody who asks me questions. I just simply can't do that. That's why I'm doing this broadcast. But rest assured, I am reading your questions, and there are questions that are forming in a queue that I think are really good questions that would have broad interest. I'd like to do something on quantum biology. There's a question on panspermia, a question on epigenetics, to name a few that I'm hoping to get to in future episodes. And also when people ask questions, sometimes I'll use them as inspiration for articles that I'll write for my blog, The Cell's Design. So just wanted you to know that you indeed are heard, and I pay attention to the things that you are interested in. What you're interested in is what I'm interested in. Okay, I just again want to thank you for watching this broadcast. Thank you for your interest in our ministry, Reasons to Believe. Thank you for your interest in what I do. We couldn't do what we do without your friendship, your encouragement, your partnership, and your inquiries into science, faith matters. So I'm going to go ahead and bring things to a close by leaving you with this final thought, as I do each time I do a broadcast. The more that we know about science, the more that we have reasons to believe. God bless each and every one of you.